And I should say that that report has been loaded into the members area of the site during the week, so all that information is there. But thanks, Anne-Marie, and I think a very clear articulation of the changing nature of drug use and also the very changing nature of age profiles and people presenting for treatment who would not have been previously in treatment. So can I move on now to Dr. Sean Foy, a clinical psychologist. Sean is here, with over 20 years experience in the area of addiction, and he's going to bring us through both the theory and the practice related to addiction. So thank you, Sean.
Okay. I'm just timing myself, just so when you give me the 1 minute, I'll be ahead of you. I'll be telling you. I spent 4 summers in New York without air conditioning. If I end up with an American accent at the end of this presentation, please forgive me. So my name is Dr. Sean Foy. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've worked in addiction for a long time, and before I give you my presentation, I just want to tell you a bit about myself, and this is mainly so that you can just focus kind of where I'm coming from. So I began working with people who are experiencing homelessness in the UK and London roughly about in 1992. So it's actually 30 years that I've been working in addiction and mental health. And I began to work with people who were in direct access hostels, and the 2 issues that came up all the time were addiction and mental health. I worked in a variety of settings, detox, rehab, outreach, and I did a lot of harm reduction work. There's a fantastic presentation earlier on harm reduction. I relocated back to Ireland in 2000, and I had to deal with 2 things. One was that I was going to be a drugs worker in the west of Ireland in a rural area, and the second thing was that Mayo still hadn't won the All-Ireland. So I had to try and deal with that. I try and get my head around that. And so the first thing that I was trained in back in '92 was the biopsychosocial model. It's a real privilege for me to be here, and I want to thank you for inviting me. This is probably the most important thing that's happened since the creation of the state in relation to drug use on this island. I feel very privileged just to be here, and just thanks very much for inviting me. So the biopsychosocial model was the first thing I was introduced to. It made sense to me 32 years ago. It still makes sense to me today. It's very simple, and what we're going to do over the next it's probably 13 minutes now. 13 minutes. I'm going to get ahead of things. Is the biopsychosocial model is pretty straightforward. It's what's going on for you physically. Gary Broderick, who did a nice presentation earlier on, he mentioned the biopsychosocial model. It's what's going on for us physically, what's going on for us psychologically, and from a social capital point of view, the supports that we're getting, where that is kind of coming from. It's not one thing in isolation. It's actually everything. And what happens sometimes in addiction is people say addiction is, and they've got a nice, lovely, succinct sentence. And my experience of that has been that addiction is complex, and drug use is complex, both recreational and also onto dependency. So I'm going to look at this with you. I'm going to give you some examples of where, if we don't consider all 3, we're kind of not doing the people that we work with a justice. And the last thing is I'll just make some recommendations for you. So what is it? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward, to be honest. It's a holistic view of the person, so we're not looking at one thing. So some people would say to you, it's definitely in your genes. Some people would say to you, it's definitely the drug that you take. Some people would say to you, it's the environment you grow up in, it's where you're from. And what we know is that there are contributory factors that play out, but it really does not mean that if you have one aspect, this means that you're going to develop an addiction. So it's just very important to kind of understand that. It's rather than one cause, it's numerous biological, psychological, and social factors increase or decrease the risk of addiction becoming problematic for individuals. Physiological factors play a part. We're looking at genetics or mental health concerns, trauma, social norms. Look, an example of this is I grew up in Mayo. The first drug I took was alcohol. It was a social norm. It was underage drinking. If I had grown up somewhere else or in a different time, it might have been a different thing. That's just one aspect of a social norm, just to kind of understand that. Learned attitudes and expectations, opportunities and socioeconomic disadvantage can contribute to the risk of problematic use. The important word there is that they can contribute to the risk. It does not mean if you're from an area, you develop this. It does not mean that the drug makes this happen. It does not mean that you haven't got enough resilience, that that's what happens. It's not that. It's actually everything. It's everything combined. And what I'd really encourage you to do as the Assembly is just to really consider this. Because if we're trying to make effective change, really these three things have to be considered. I'm going to show you this little visual here for you. So you can see how these three things engage, and I'll give you two examples of how if you don't consider this, we're kind of missing a trick, really. And I don't mean that in a dismissive way, but we're actually just we're not doing the service that we got set up to do. So the first thing is from a psychological point of view, our mental health. Hopefully your mental health is good. This is a hot room, so I don't know how that's affecting you. We've got good coping strategies and our self-esteem is good. From a biological point of view, it's our physical health, if we're carrying any disabilities or if we have any injuries. And there's lots more to it than this, but for the purpose of this presentation, this is the bits that I'm kind of focusing on. The last bit is the social, sometimes referred to as your social capital. So it's your family, your friends, your work, the community that you're kind of linked in with. So I'll give you an example of where, if we don't consider all these three things, it kind of falls apart. There was a documentary that was done by either Channel 4 or BBC, I can't remember now, and it was done probably about 15 years ago, maybe more than that, and it was called Detox. And there was a documentary filmmaker who hung out on a detox in Kent. It was for alcohol, and he got to know people very well who were detoxing. And there was one woman there, let's say her name was Mary, and she was detoxing on the unit. She was in for alcohol, and she was in a terrible, terrible state. She stayed there for about 3 or 4 weeks, and she got, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the best possible care anybody could get for her physical presentation. The consultants were compassionate and understanding. They did a really, really good job. The entire team did a really, really good job. But what happened was she was discharged. The documentary filmmaker went around to see her. He was told that she was at home. He showed up at her house, and it's a really heartbreaking scene. He shows up at her house and he says, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Look, I'm fine." And she's finishing off the remnants of a bottle of vodka. And he gets really emotional, the documentary maker, and he says, like, "What happened?" And they go in and sit down, and he comes out from behind the camera, and he sits there and he says to her, he said, "What day were you discharged?" And she said, "I was discharged on the 10th of May. And he says, "Oh my God, that's the anniversary of the death of your brother." And she says, "Yeah." So we can, if we deal with things in isolation, this is what happens. So this woman got the absolute best care that she possibly could get from a physical point of view, but nobody checked in relation to coping strategies. Nobody linked in relation to her mental health, from what I can work out. And nobody checked out about the social capital, where she was going back into and what she was doing. This is where we go wrong. We have to consider all three. The biopsychosocial model is actually really simple to understand, but we just need to do more of it. And Professor Eamon Keenan just said earlier on in his presentation, that I unfortunately missed because I was driving up from Mayo, but he referenced it later on, that the dual diagnosis program that's in place is very good, and this is very much welcome. This is a great thing to have. But what I would say to you is that in my career of working in Ireland, trying to get somebody into a mental health service, to get an appropriate service who has an addiction issue, was impossible. I never managed it. So that's 20 years of work. I never managed to kind of do it. It could be, I can only speak for myself, but it's important to kind of say that to you. We have to have all three, otherwise we don't get anything. Just going to talk to you a little bit about early research into addiction and somehow why this is so important. So the early research into addiction in the 1950s and 60s, rats were put into little cages called Skinner cages, or Skinner boxes actually is what they were called. And these rats were put in there on their own, and they were given access to water, and water with an opiate. And they found that every one of the rats overdosed. They all died. The myth that if you take heroin once, you're addicted for life is drawn back to this particular bit of research. There's further research that I'm going to present to you by Dr. Bruce Alexander in just a minute. But the reason I'm highlighting this particular research is because this research can become part of the public consciousness. It can create concern and awareness amongst the public, and that can drive policy, and that can drive law. So the bit that I would recommend that you read is, there's a fantastic PDF, you can get it online, called Crack in the Rearview Mirror by Reinerman. And I would really encourage you to please try and read that, because it gives a nice overview of how we can get things wrong. The other thing I would say to you is that there's another little piece I want to just say to you, which is Dr. Carol Hart has a fantastic book called High Price, and I would encourage you to try and check that out. And again, like, what we know is that there are certain things that might indicate that an addiction or a relationship with alcohol might be problematic, but it does not mean it's one thing. There is no silver bullet here, you know. So this guy called Bruce Alexander, who is an absolute hero of mine, I'm pretty sure Bruce is still alive. He's a Canadian guy, and if any of you guys meet him, please tell him that Sean Foy said hi. He won't know who I am, but this guy means a lot to me. He thought that if I was in a room on my own and I had access to water or water with opiates, I would probably take the opiates. So what he does is he creates a rat park, and rat park essentially is an 8 square metre colony, rat colony. The rats had toys to play with. They were free to mate. I don't know if some of them fell in love. Love's a lovely thing, isn't it? If you fall in love, it's a nice thing. I hope everybody here is in love. That's a really nice thing, isn't it? When you're in love, you can handle anything, right? Love conquers all, right? So there was a lot of love in Rat Park. There was a lot of love in Rat Park. And they were able to play and interact with each other, and they could kind of have the crack. And he also gave them access to the same amount of water that was drugged. So I'm going to show you some photographs of Rat Park, but I want you to try and think about what do you think the outcome was. So in the Skinner boxes, when the rats were in on their own, they all developed addictions and they all overdosed. So in Rat Park, I wonder if it was different. So just to share with you here, this is what it looked like. I don't know if the rats voted to have the inside of the thing painted. I don't know what was going on there, but that's what happened. But this is actually a photograph of the original Rat Park. And so they were able to kind of go around and have the crack. They were able to kind of play hide and seek. They could do all that. And this guy is doing a little bit of exercise here. He's kind of getting on with his thing. That's kind of what he's doing. And I spent ages, myself and my colleague Fidelma spent ages trying to find a really nice photograph of rats. It's a tough gig, but this is what seriously, mice left, right and centre, like no problem at all. Like mice are cute in some weird way. Rats not so much, but this is what I got. This is what I got. So I don't know. It's somebody said, "Ah, oh, okay." We probably need to talk later. But the very interesting thing about this is just think about what happened. They had enhanced living conditions. What happened? And really, what we found was the research is just amazing. Really, the rats hardly ever use the drugged water. None of the rats used the drugged water compulsively, and none of them overdosed. Okay, so you might say to yourself, "Look, that's Canadian rats for you. That's just the way those guys roll. That's just the way it is, right?" But actually, from a human perspective, we have the Vietnam War, and the Vietnam War. The main author on this is a woman called Robbins. I would encourage you to kind of read this. And essentially, what it is that 20% of the armed forces were using heroin in the Vietnam War. And of this 20%, 95% of them just stopped as soon as they came back to mainland America. So you may have been aware of this, you may not have been. Again, this is fairly well known in addiction circles, but just to kind of share it with you. And Robbins is brilliant and just kind of highlights that it's the enhanced living conditions, it's the connections with people who love them, it's the opportunities and the hope and the fact that they were not in a war zone meant that there was no longer a functional role for ongoing heroin use. The question we always ask ourselves as psychologists is, what is the function of the behaviour? To me, if I'm in a war zone and I'm in a foxhole in Vietnam and the chances are I will not see the morning, then I think a very rational decision is to take heroin. Whereas when I'm back in mainland America, maybe I don't need to kind of do that. So just to share that with you. This is the last one, so I'm... One, you got in.
No, you have 1 minute 30 to save the rats. I'll give you 2 if it's a happy ending.
I was just trying to get there. You had to come in, man. So this is the final. This is the final slide. So, look, the thing I've learned about addiction is that it is complex and multifaceted. That's for sure. I've loved every minute I've worked in addiction. I've never regretted a minute of it. And I've learned so much from the people I've been lucky enough to work with, both as clients and colleagues. But ultimately, what we need are treatments that recognise a biopsychosocial model. We need treatments that kind of overlap that. You've had some lovely presentations today of people that are actually doing some of this already, but we just need to do an awful lot more of it. I think from a dual diagnosis point of view, particularly, we need to do a much broader scope, and we need to do it deeper, in my opinion. treatments have to be evidence-based. Otherwise, really, to be honest with you, what's the point? And we do know what works in addiction with certain cohorts. But more important than that, it has to be rooted in compassion and empathy. It's not conveyor belt approach. People are individuals. We can't give everybody the same thing. We actually need to modify it so everybody gets a uniquely individualized care plan. And the last thing is, like, look, there is no silver bullet. I wish there was. But it's the interaction, really, of all these three things which creates who we are and how we see the world. Treating one factor in isolation is not enough. Thanks very much.
Thank you.